Hi, welcome everyone to this week's lecture. It's going to be about ethics in research. It's a very important topic, and the reason that it's important is because as researchers, it's extremely necessary for us to behave ethically to our participants. By not doing that, we run the risk of harming your subjects or your participants. And as a researcher, you really just don't want to do that. So in our book, chapter 3 is called Research Ethics. And many of you have taken, I think probably all of you by this point have took intro to sociology. And so you probably were exposed to ethics. You might have taken other courses on ethics. And other than that, some of these huge research experiments, these famous ones that we've known about, just because there's just really messed with a whole bunch of people. So it's something that's just well known in American society. You've probably heard of, such as the Tuskegee experiment, where they gave African American men syphilis and didn't treat them with penicillin to see what were the effects. A lot of things, a lot of medical doctors and researchers acted extremely unethically before the IRB came into place, before we started to have, being mandated to acting ethically. A lot of what we know about medical information in general was because it was done to African Americans, African American women, for example, shaped women's health with pap smears and things of that nature. There's a book, a really good book called Medical Apartheid, if you're really interested in this subject, where you can go into more detail on. But for now, I'm just going to explain to you what you need to know for this course. Okay, so let me share my screen, and we're just going to just give me one moment. Let me see where my PowerPoint is. Here it is, ethics, and I'm sharing my screen. So um, we will pay you $45 for 1 hour of your time is what I have as a subtitle here. And the reason why is because one of the things you have to keep in mind as a researcher, it's okay to pay participants, but when you're paying them an absorbent amount, that rings in, then alarm bells goes on. So what are you trying to do? So recently, in the UK, for example, there was a news report that went out that they were going to give healthy participants, people who had never had COVID, they were going to give them COVID. And I think they were going to pay him $1,000 to do that. And it passed it was under ethical review. I believe it passed. I'm not sure, but that's quite um, unethical to give somebody something where you don't have a treatment for, and where you have run the risk of getting long COVID. So that rang off a lot of alarm bells that you would inject healthy subjects with COVID. So here's a YouTube video. You'll be able to grab inside of the PowerPoints and watch that video, or you can just Google the Tuskegee syphilis experiment if you want to learn more about it. I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's a very famous study. You need to know it. And then the Belmont report. I believe your book, let me take a look. Yes, the book goes over the Belmont report. So that's also something that you need to know. But out of that, we got different principles. So 3 different principles: respect for persons, treating persons as autonomous agents, and protecting those with diminished autonomy. So you need to protect people like prisoners, and because a lot of research a long time ago, prisoners, they would just be like, oh, we need to test some drug, let's go test the prisoners. And I'm not talking about like super, super long time ago. I mean, like in the 70s even. And right now, we're having reports that prisoners were unknowingly given ivermectin to treat their COVID symptoms, for example, the horse tranquilizer. And uh, they used to test cannabis, for example. I teach about that in my medical cannabis course. They would test prisoners. They would go in and give prisoners cannabis to see, and then they would study them, and they were like, well, they found out cannabis doesn't cause you to have anger outbursts or aggression. It actually does the opposite. It relaxes you. And at that period of time, cannabis was being viewed as this drug that made people go crazy, and that's why they needed to ban it. But the research reports coming out of the prison population was showing the opposite. Another thing is that you want to minimize possible harms and maximize benefits. So, for example, with that COVID study where they're injecting healthy people with COVID, you really have to ask yourself, is this harm you're doing to the participant, is that for the greater good? Is the benefit, what you're going to get out of it, sufficient for giving somebody COVID? And then justice, you want to distribute benefits and risk of research fairly. So, I mean, that is what it is, being fair when you're doing your research. So in your book, it gives a few examples. It talks about the Humphreys experiment, the tea room trade, and that was done in the 70s when they wanted to get more information about homosexuals, and they did it. It was today it would be very unethical how he got his information. You need to know about that study because you will see it back in this course. And in your book, it even tells you, that's really nice, about the CITI program. I didn't know that until like right now. And that certificate that you guys are actually working on currently, which is due here in a couple of weeks. Then the Belmont report, to please go over that. And then the Stanford prison experiment, know that. That one is pretty well famous. Everybody's taught that in intro to psychology classes, for example, and I'm sure you've heard about an intro to sociology class with that whole group think and what can happen. And then it goes into talk about institutional review boards, which is something that we have been covering already and why they are there. And the next part is about informed consent. So I want to just stop there for a moment and go over the 4 guidelines of ethical issues in research. 1, you want to protect your research subjects. 2, you want to maintain honesty and openness. 3, you want to achieve valid results. And 4, you want to encourage appropriate application. So before you start any research project, what you do is you develop your research idea, your problem, and if you were going to collect human subjects, so participants, and you're going to have them do whatever, maybe fill out a survey, maybe do a clinical trial, whatever it is, as soon as you're going to touch a person or interact with a person in any way, you need to develop a research proposal that goes and that's reviewed. Your project is reviewed by the IRB. You send that to the IRB, you tell them what you're going to do, you tell them how much harm and the benefits, you tell them, and you also make your informed consent. And everybody has probably been in contact with an informed consent. I'm sure everybody has heard of that or knows or has had to fill one out at the doctor's office, for example, probably. And in this informed consent, you go over everything in the study. In your book, they have an example. And if you are you can't get informed consent from a minor. You get that from their parent, but the child also needs to understand what they're consenting for. So you have 2 special steps when you're working with children. And when you're working with adults, you give them that informed consent. You don't just give it to them and say, sign it. You actually have to read it through and really go over it step by step to make sure that they understand what they are signing. So, and ideally you want to have a witness there with you. In your research studies, it's important for them to be anonymous and confidential. That helps the participant be more open and honest. Here, step 2 with you when you're doing that. And what you definitely don't want to do is coerce people to get into your study. So no pressure whatsoever. A person should be able to quit your study at any time for any reasons, no questions asked. And and you have to be careful because you can also coerce someone, especially poor people, monetarily. So like with that COVID study, when they're offering them $1,000, I doubt, a super rich person is going to be like, yeah, sure, inject me with COVID. No, you're going to get like really, really, really poor, vulnerable people who are signing up to do that. So you need to be careful with that as a researcher. And you need to be honest and just be truthful. Don't tell them straight up what your research study is about. Don't hide any details from them whatsoever. Then there's another section in your book about animal ethics. We have a special thing, for animals altogether. They have some keywords in your books that they go over, such as debriefing, which you should know as well. So the most important guidelines to know is you don't want to ever harm your research participants. You want to obtain informed consent, avoid deception in research except in limited circumstances, maintain privacy and confidentiality at all times. When I was a research assistant, there was this huge study being done, and all of the patients' information and their data were in this room. And usually that should be like in a separate room under lock and key, but it was like in this office where all the researcher assistants were coming in and out. So that's you could trust all of us. We were all research assistants, and we weren't, and I wasn't part of that study. I was doing my own study, but I happened to also use that office along with some other people, and you could trust us. But that's not really a way to maintain privacy in real life. You really don't. That was really a sloppy way to manage and keep the data private. So with the IRBs, usually you tell them how you plan to keep the data private and how you plan to make sure it's confidential, and you make sure you tell that to your subjects as well in the informed consent. Usually they get a number, a study number, a participant number, for example. So debriefing, a researcher's informing subjects after an experiment about the experiment's purposes and methods, and evaluating subjects' personal reactions to the experiment. So sometimes there could be times where they have to do that after the fact, for example. And HIPAA, we didn't speak about this last section, but this is an old slide. But HIPAA agreements, that's when you have to keep mum. You're not allowed to talk about, people's information. You have, I'm sure, signed a HIPAA document at your doctor's office, definitely. And that's like, for example, if you say something to your therapist or your medical doctor, it goes in your files, but they can't share it with anybody else because they are bound under HIPAA law not to do that. And so that's why if you want to then send your information to another doctor, you have to sign a form saying that the person whose information is about allows it for this office to ascertain your medical records. And that's because of HIPAA. So should social scientists be permitted to conduct replications of Milgram's obedience experiments? So just ask yourself that after you've gone over and read about those experiments and what it did to people, because they really believed that they were hurting other people, and it really caused them to have reactions. So should we be able to still do that? And can you justify such research as permissible within the current ethical standards? So do you think that something like that, what happened back then, thinking about what we now do based on all these crazy things, what we used to do, if that's something nowadays we would be allowed to do? And why not, given the new standards? Would that, or would that not work? Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. So that is my ethics lesson. Bottom line, uh, be a good person when you're doing research, and especially if you plan on going to grad school. You, as a researcher, you just want to do the right thing and protect your participants' data, and keep it private and confidential, and just do the right thing. It's just amazing when I hear stories of present day of researchers who are not doing the right thing ethically. It's just completely not necessary to do that with your research. Uh, um, Now these days, it's just, we know that you are very aware that you should be acting in an ethical manner. Okay. So that's all I have for today, guys. Be thinking about your research project. I need to see you guys on Blackboard pulling those up, what you want to do. Just get your ideas up and out there. Okay. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.